Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Charlie McBride, as people say, and I'm going to talk about my life as an educational nomad. And this is like a 40-year journey living in different countries. And that's what the word nomad implies, that I'm living in places 7-8 years, but none of these places are exactly home. And part of the speech is supposed to end up, I become a global citizen. And I would like to kind of tie that together, the importance of becoming a global citizen. And this relates to the butterfly effect because really, as a young person, I went to high school, I went to university, I got a chemical engineering degree, and I should have gotten a job in industry, bought a house, got a life, stayed in America for the rest of my life. But after university, I made a tangential decision to a linear path. In this tangential decision, I joined the United States Peace Corps. This is a volunteer organization, and they ship young people overseas to help in developing countries. And they sent me off to a place called Swaziland. It's now called Eswatini, but this decision to join the Peace Corps and to be sent overseas is what sparked my entire global journey, and that's kind of the butterfly effect. But I also think there's about 300 million of me, people working and living overseas for most of their life. And I think we 300 million people have a strong voice for the future. Like I said, I grew up in the United States. I grew up in a place called Buffalo, New York, famous for snow. It's on the Canadian border, and if you look it up, it really is famous for snow. And I lived there 16 out of 22 years. I also lived in Richmond, Virginia, but I finished high school in Buffalo. I went to university in Buffalo, and I just led a classic American life. That's all I knew. American TV, American music, American sports, American propaganda, the American dream. I took it all in. I didn't know any better. That's just who I was. And then, when I joined the Peace Corps, it all changed. This was a dramatic change in my life, and I've never looked back. And before I start my journey, I would like to put it in context a little bit. This globalization you always hear about. I looked it up once. There's 4 different globalizations. I don't know how accurate it all is. But I was born in the second globalization. This was really the rise of the United States after the post-war, World War II, where the United States dominated the world architecture because we came out of World War II better than most countries. The third globalization, this was the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of modern China. I was overseas most of that. And this fourth globalization, they kind of call it technological globalization, because technology has changed everything. Because with technology, there are no borders. And people can do things anywhere they want, and they can ship it anywhere they want. And I have been overseas for this entire fourth globalization. So my story is part of the globalization story. And another thing that I think is important, maybe not everybody else does, is the change in the population of planet Earth. When I was born, 3 billion people. Now we're at 8 billion. I think in 2030, 9 billion. This is a tremendous growth in the world population. And of these 8 billion people, there must be 200, 300 million moving around, working in different places. You have poor people trying to get a better life, going to Europe, going to North America, going to the Middle East. You have middle-class people who can get jobs anywhere they want now. And then you have the wealthy class. They have homes everywhere. They actually run the globalized system. And my point is, my journey is an isolated journey, but there are many, many other people doing similar things. But back to my journey. I went to a place called Swaziland in 1983. It's a small country. I was there to teach math and science. The country of Swaziland was an expanding secondary school system. They didn't have enough math and science teachers. So volunteer organizations, including the Peace Corps, they produced their math and science teachers, until the country could produce their own. And actually, it was a success story. 15 years later, the country had enough math and science teachers. And the ironic thing was, I actually didn't know anything about teaching. I had a chemical engineering degree. So I basically learned teaching on a day-by-day basis. But the picture that you see, kind of mud huts and rolling valleys, this is where I went. In northern Swaziland, it was a rural place. Most of the students I taught came out of these mud huts. They were subsistence farmers. They raised cattle. They grew maize. A lot of the men worked in South Africa for money. And it was a pretty basic place. Every day, I taught math and science to Swazi young people, and I worked with Swazi peers, male and female, who were just teaching for a living. It was a simple life, in a way. No electricity, no phones, no TV. Usually we had water, and I will say this, you have water, life is okay. But when they take away water, it's really, really tough. But where I was, we had water. But for 3.5 years, I lived a great life. If I look back, it was one of the greatest experiences in my entire life. And what did I take away from my life in Swaziland? I will say this, when I left the United States, I was blind. When I left Swaziland, my eyes were open. It was like getting a master's in life. I was able to do a lot of traveling, see a lot of things. I just didn't know anything when I got to Swaziland. And when I left, I felt like I had learned a lot more. After Swaziland, I went to New York City. The Peace Corps, they had a program for returning teachers in the Peace Corps. And if I would agree to teach in a bad New York City school, they would give me a master's degree from Columbia University, a full-time job teaching, and they would make sure I got a state license in New York. It was a great deal. But the only catch was you had to teach in a bad school. So that's what I got. I was in William Howard Taft in the Bronx. This was the famous South Bronx of the 1980s. Actually, it wasn't a terrible place, but it was the people were pretty poor. They were either immigrants, working poor, and the big problem was low-level criminality everywhere. This was the AIDS epidemic, this was the crack epidemic, and it was just a tough place to live. It was a tough place to teach. Literally, they had metal detectors in the 1980s when I was there, a long time ago. And 50% of the students dropped out by the end of grade 9. That was that kind of school. Teaching those students, no fun. Teaching the older students, though, very fulfilling. They were people who wanted to get out of this place. And they were very, very hardworking and appreciated anybody who was willing to commit to teaching them. What did I glean from my time in New York City? Famous expression, there but for the grace of God go I. I used to always think to myself, how would I have done if I was living in this place, going to this school? Because really, I wasn't that special. And I really am convinced you're either special to get out of those places or you're lucky. And we always celebrate the special people who can rise out of these desperate situations, but we should empathize with the people who can't make it out, because I don't think it's that easy. And so that was the lesson that I learned that I carry to this day. After New York City, I kind of wandered around the United States for a year, and then, I don't know what it was, maybe it was the traveling bug or this nomadic gene, but I went to a job fair, and I got a job in Cairo, Egypt. I taught at the Cairo American College from 1990 to 1997. This was a very good school, actually, and this is where I became a professional educator. This was the first good school I taught at. What do we mean by good? All the students wanted to go to college, all the teachers were well trained, a lot of structure, high expectations from students and the parents. And over the course of that time, I became a professional educator. And what that means is I was confident I could teach almost anywhere after this. The things I learned in Cairo, well, it's a great city, but it was my first experience living in a completely Muslim nation. I grew up in Northeast United States, basically in a Christian Catholic home, Christian Catholic school, culture. Swaziland, half the people were Christians, half of them were animists. But in Cairo, or in Egypt, 90% were Muslim. Just get used to it. Friday and Saturday were the weekends because of Friday prayers. And I love the call to prayer 5 times a day. If you ever get the experience, you should take a boat on the Nile and listen to the call to prayer reverberate across the river. It's a beautiful thing at sunset. But my point about the Muslim nation is this idea that we should accept all religions. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but after 7 years, you do kind of just becomes ingrained in you that you can accept all peoples. The other thing that I would say, maybe my own personal thing, the weight of history. Cairo is 5,000 years old. Cairo, the pyramid's always looming around you. 5,000 years. I'm an American. We grow up in a young nation, manifest destiny, go west, young people, relocate. You can always move to a place and reinvent yourself. The Egyptians didn't feel that way. For them, the possibilities were finite, not infinite. This is not everybody, but for a lot of people. And the weight of history creates these finite timelines. And that was good for me to realize that you can't do whatever you want. People don't have all these choices. And these finite situations was what I gleaned from feeling the weight of history. But after 7 years in the desert, I went up to Europe because I wanted to enjoy European living. I had been to Europe many times, but I wanted to live there. And I would say there's a big difference between visiting a place and living there. But for 3 years, I taught at the International School of Brussels, another good school. And what I remember from there the most was reading books. I love to read books, always have. But I decided to read some of the great European writers. And I do want to talk about 2 books, James Joyce Ulysses and Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. They're famous books. But what I remember about these 2 books is they try to dissect culture. Like, what does culture even mean? You throw this word around, but where does your culture come from? And it made me think, like I was born in Buffalo, New York, at a certain time in history, with a certain geography, with certain industries. I had 13 children in my family. I lived in an ethnic neighborhood. But all these factors coalesce into this blanket we call culture. And thinking about this made me examine the American culture, but more importantly, what you realize is everybody has their own culture. You grow up for a place for the first 20 years of your life, that makes a huge impact on who you are for the rest of your life. And if I could appreciate my own culture, I really think it helped when you're looking around the world, you can empathize with other people's culture. And this word empathy, if you're going to be a global citizen, you should look up the definition of empathy. And I do think understanding that everybody's culture is unique to them was a good lesson for me. Actually, at the end of this cultural study, I went back to the United States. I thought I would become an American citizen, but it just didn't work out for me. I don't know if you remember 9/11, but it wasn't the best time to be an American. So I just made another random decision. Maybe this is my nomadic gene, but I went to another job fair. I got a job in a country I didn't know very well, and I moved to a city that I never heard of. The country was China, which I should have known something about, and the city was Suzhou, which is actually a famous city. Just goes to show you think you travel a lot, but I didn't really know that much. And I lived in Suzhou for 4 years, and then I worked in Nanjing for 9 years. I was in China for 13 years. This is a picture. I met my wife there. We own an apartment there, and I'll be there in a few weeks. Actually, I never even heard of Suzhou, but in the Chinese perspective, it's actually a famous city. So I was ignorant again. And in Nanjing, I was there for longer, 9 years. Taught at a really good school, Nanjing International School. And I just want to point out the energy of China. I don't know how much you know about modern China, but in the 13 years I was there, it was like they terraformed the whole country. They just out with the old, in with the new. They rebuilt the entire place. New houses, new roads, new subway system, new high-speed trains, new airports, new factories. Literally, it was just unbelievable. And if you've never been to modern China, you should really go have a look. It was astounding. I like to use the word worker bees because, hey, people work there. They appreciate hard workers. And I think in the United States context, to be called a hard worker wasn't always a compliment. I disagree completely. Being a hard worker should be a point of pride. It should not be an insult. So the Chinese were hard workers. A couple other things, this thing we call eating bitterness. I love to use this phrase, some of my students know this. This idea is accepting difficult circumstances, getting through them, and becoming stronger for it. I do think most people, it's easy to deal with life's good points, but sometimes you run into difficulties, and literally everybody runs into difficult times in their life. But to be able to get through it, endure it, and become stronger from it. That's what I mean by eating bitterness. It's an acceptance of things. And the Chinese taught me this, and I think it's a great attribute. The other thing is, maybe it's an East Asian construct, the group versus the individual. As an American, we always believe that the individual is more important than the group. The Chinese do not feel this way on the whole. I don't think Singapore does either. And I've come around, I do believe the group is more important than the individual. Maybe I'm older and more conservative now, but I do think if you can take care of the group, the majority of individuals benefit. Of course, it's not perfect, and individual rights and individual freedoms are important. But I don't think you can let the individual dominate the group. The group has to accept the individuals. That's my opinion. After China, I came down south to the little red dot we call Singapore. Talk about a globalized country. We talk about globalization. This is a country that became wealthy on trade, shipping, tourism, commerce, transportation, all tied to the global network, China, India, the West, and they've done very well for themselves. It's a very wealthy country, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out that 40% of the workers in this country come from overseas. People like me, we're almost the majority. People don't like to acknowledge this, but I think the facts are clear. Not everybody likes it, but this is a globalized nation. So it's only fitting that I kind of ended up here. In terms of what I gleaned from Singapore, I don't know, because I'm still here in the middle of it. But I do think this country is small, but it's organized, and it has controlled freedoms. But I think if you're going to be an individual, this is a country where you can have a safe house to grow up in, a decent school for your kids to go to, and fairly good job prospects. Not many other countries can offer that to all of their citizens. I predict less than 10. Well, actually, I don't know, maybe more than 10, but not that many. So actually, I consider this a good thing. Whatever they're doing here, I think they're doing a good job. The last thing is this last stop as an educational nomad. I'm approaching the end of my educational career, and it's still funny to me to think about 15,000 kilometers away. I was born in Buffalo, New York. A snowy place. I'm sure they're waiting for snow now. It's probably on the ground. And here I am in the tropics, ending my journey as an educational nomad. And what does it all mean? Well, I do think this global mindset, I mean, it took me 40 years maybe to get it, because I was kind of ignorant as a young person. But is being a global citizen is an important feature, and I think the IB is trying to teach international mindedness to all its people. And I would like to say that I think in the future, it's going to become a big deal. Let's say there's 300 million global citizens. And my idea for the future is that nation states will disappear. And that climate change is already here, but it's going to become a real issue. And sooner or later, the human race is going to approach things from a global point of view. And when this happens, the global citizens with an international mindset will have the strongest voice and a positive vision for the future. And I'm really looking forward to the day where the people with the global mindset can stand up and guide the humans to a better future. So that's my talk. Thank you for listening on this Friday afternoon.